If you want something major to change, then you've got to stand up and fight for it. You can't simply request.
Black America in the early 1960s was a landscape riddled with discontent and frustration. The first major strikes to the tidy barriers of segregation were won via the integration of Little Rock Central High School in 1957 and the Freedom Rides of 1961. Many blacks also migrated north to the kinder side of the Mason-Dixon line, seeking new and better lives. Blacks still living in the South lived with the shackles of a so-called freedom, tethered by the rhetoric of the Jim Crow laws that made separate but equal a palatable and morally acceptable excuse to keep black Americans under the thumb of a white-ruled society. The civil rights movement in the 60s persisted, but struggled to keep the momentum due to lukewarm coverage of marches and demonstrations that were easily forgotten once the nightly news was turned off or the newspaper put down. But when the children of Birmingham, Alabama marched on May 2nd and 3rd, 1963, images of the youngest victims of oppression taking a stand and the violence that ensued flooded the news. The march marked the beginning of the chapter when everything changed.
Ain't gonna let nobody turn me around,
You're not sensitized to things as much until you have to live it.
Alabama and Birmingham completely segregated by law. It was against the law to have any type of social interaction at all. The only relationship that could be had in Birmingham, Alabama was that of employer-employee. Even though black families paid all of the same taxes, we did not have access to the things that those taxes supported. My first introduction to segregation was when my grandmother died in the basement of a hospital here in Birmingham, because African Americans were not admitted as patients to the hospital to be in rooms and beds as white patients were. As a child, I sat with my grandmother in the basement of the hospital until she died. That memory stayed with me. I was very young. I was 10.
I could see for myself where water fountains, for example, were marked colored and white. I could see stores that had entrances such as beer, liquor, and colored.
Places like Newberry's, there were places like all these nice eatery places and things, the nice hot dog places and stuff, and we couldn't go in them.
The Southern Christian Leadership Conference, with Martin Luther King as its president, was established with the goal of gaining rights and equality for the black community. They sought change via a nonviolent approach, such as sit-ins in all-white restaurants, silent marches, and boycotts of racist stores. These protests did not attract great attention from the media, and so news remained contained in the mostly local theater. Strategies changed at the January meeting of the SCLC. Birmingham activist Fred Shuttleworth suggested moving attention to Birmingham, which was a segregation stronghold. James Bevel, an SCLC member, made the radical suggestion of using students in the movement, hoping pictures of youth would garner much-needed media attention.
Older people, many of them were afraid that their employers would fire them. So many thought it was fairly courageous of young people to take to the street, and perhaps there was an attitude of, what do we have to lose?
The children had only one thing to lose, and that was to make sure that those kids who were seniors would not be expelled or would not be allowed to graduate.
Although many parents feared violence and possible incarceration for their children, Bevel still connected to black youth, including via a black radio station. Once recruited, many of the youth received nonviolence training, which was critical to the ideology of the civil rights movement.
And they did warn us the police might have dogs, they might have billy clubs, but they said this in the vein of stressing that this was a nonviolent movement. And they asked people to really search themselves and to search their hearts. And if they knew that they could not be nonviolent, they asked them not to compromise the integrity of the nonviolent march. They were asked to self-select.
The only thing that we were told is, expect anything because you don't know how these people are going to respond.
On the morning of May 2nd, 1963, radio announcer Shelley Stewart read, "Kids, there's going to be a party in the park. Bring your toothbrushes because lunch will be served." This was code that the time had come to march. The May 2nd march saw no violence, but did succeed in bringing national media coverage to Birmingham. When the children marched again on May 3rd, the media was ready to tell the country and the world what they saw.
We were in school. In fact, we had just been released from class for our lunch hour. And people showed up at our school on the outside, protesters, and they had signs that said, "It's time."
We had come from high school, and it was like a total exodus. And they all, convened on 60th Street Baptist Church, and there were so many children on that day. The police vans were overcrowded. The jails were saturated beyond belief, and we were about half a block from 16th Street Baptist Church when we were stopped by the police, the militia, the state troopers, the fire department, and Bull Connor. And Bull Connor was standing out there and telling us, we didn't need to do this, that, or the other and go back to school and blah, 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 blah. And one of my friends who has passed last year, Watch Booker, started singing, "Ain't gonna let Bull Connor turn me round, turn me round, turn me round. Ain't gonna let Bull Connor turn me around. Keep on walking, keep on talking, marching up to freedom land." And we started singing it. And that was at the point when they either were frustrated at the thought that we were being defiant or whatever they thought, or just because they had the power and the law behind them, they just turned the water hoses on us and the dogs, and a very harrowing experience. We were scared to death. We were children. We didn't know what to expect. And I just never thought that people could be so ugly to children. We didn't run. We tried to avoid the combativeness of the policemen. And by that, I mean, they be beating you and stuff, and you try to, shelter yourself from getting hit in the head and being bludgeoned.
Well, as soon as we arrived at the park, they released the water from the water hoses. And then, of course, people scattered and tried to hide behind buildings. Of course, the dogs were there. And so, it was chaos at that point. People were running for their individual safety. People were doing a lot of different things.
After fire hoses, dogs, and bludgeoning, the organizer, James Bevel, emerged from the blockaded 16th Street Baptist Church with a bullhorn and demanded that the children go home to avoid further peril. In Birmingham, the only visible scars that remained of the one-sided war were an empty park, broken glass, and wet cement. Outside of Birmingham, the story was just beginning to be told.
I think without news coverage, it would have gone on a number of more years, whether it be a decade or however long it took. If you don't experience it, it doesn't register. If it's not seen, it's not registered.
We had reporters from all over the nation that descended on Birmingham, and because of these reporters and their photography, the pictures they took, like the water hose photo, for example, those photos made their way all around the world. And what was captured on television made its way all the way around the world.
Chronicles of the March made the front pages, and news rippled through America with gut-wrenching photos that depicted the horrors and inhumane treatment of children in Birmingham. Even President Kennedy, who was previously reluctant to place race issues on center stage, was forced to stare it in the eye. An electrified country and world was jolted into action.
The children were seen as the ones who broke the back of segregation.
The Children's March paved the way for the historic march on Washington in August 1963. This, followed by the tragic 16th Street Baptist Church bombing, which took the lives of 4 young girls, moved Kennedy to propose the Civil Rights Act, which, after his assassination, was signed into law by President Johnson in 1964. It abolished segregation and Jim Crow laws across the United States.
The laws help. It is a milestone, but it doesn't guarantee what the law says will actually be done.
As some years have passed, we still find the hidden effects of racism. I would like to be remembered for trying to do some things that would be beneficial to not only people of my generation now, but preferably to the generations that come behind.
We must all stand guard against injustices that continue today. Power is never relinquished willingly, nor does the desire for more power stay dormant for long. The defense of justice sits squarely on the shoulders of each citizen.
Martin King would say it like this: injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere.
Let your voice be heard. Stand up. There are important issues that affect you and affect the students coming behind you. Speak up.